Hey everyone, my name is Feng Yu, and this is my final project. My final project's topic is about euthanasia. The reason that I picked this topic is because I saw two news stories online. One is from BBC and the other is from Dignity in Dying. The first one happened in January of year 2018. A young Dutch woman who drank poison supplied by a doctor and lay down to die. Her name is Aurelia Brewers. Um, this case is a little different than how we see euthanasia in general because Aurelia Brewers she was not terminally ill. She was allowed to end her life on account of her psychiatric illness. So in other words, she was suffering from mental illness. And here's a quote by her. I'm 29 years old and I've chosen to be voluntarily euthanized. I've chosen this because I have a lot of mental health issues. I suffer unbearably and hopelessly. Every breath I take is a torture. So from this that we can tell that she's definitely suffering from the illness, and being alive is actual torture, and she lost hope and passion at staying alive, and that's the main reason why she picked this route and the decision to end her life. The second case happened to a man named Noel Conway. He was diagnosed with motor neural disease back in November 2014. The disease is also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, aka ALS. The disease will cause human body to lose many percent of the muscles, which will eventually cause human body to stop working. So Conway could not walk and had to be hoisted from bed to chair, as well as experiencing increasing difficulty with breathing and also having to wear a ventilator to nearly 20 hours per day. Conway's condition had continued to turn in a bad way, and Conway had become more aware of what will happen, and eventually he became increasingly focused on end-of-life concerns. So these are the two cases where both of the patients want to end their life because they can no longer bear with their disease and the pain that comes with the illness. And there's another common point between these two cases is where these two patients travel to another country like Switzerland or Netherlands, where euthanasia is legalized to end their life. And there is actually a phrase for this kind of practices. It is called suicide tourism. Suicide tourism or euthanasia tourism is the practice of potential suicide candidates traveling to a jurisdiction to commit suicide or assisted suicide, in which is legal in some part of the world. So these two cases came to my attention because it brought up a really huge topic of whether if we should legalize euthanasia. And in order to better understand the whole concept and the story behind it, I will first talk about different types of euthanasia, and I'll talk about the history and the development of the topic and the issue, and later I will expand that to more modern debate. So first of all, I like to start with different types of euthanasia. The first one is active euthanasia. It is when doctors end the patient's life by providing a lethal substance to the patient with merciful intent. The second one is called passive euthanasia. It is withholding or withdrawing of life-sustaining treatment either at the request of the patient or when prolonging life is considered futile. The third one is called indirect euthanasia. It refers to the prescription of painkillers that may be fatal in an attempt. The last one is called physician-assisted suicide. It refers to a medical professional aiding the patient in terminating their life based on the patient's request. And according to the article Attitudes of Physicians Toward Different Types of Euthanasia in Kuwait, the author mentioned these 4 types of euthanasia. And as of this moment, there are only few parts of the world that allow euthanasia and legalized it. Some of the countries includes the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and also very few states in the United States along the way. For example, California, but that's only under some very specific set of rules and restriction. So as in general, euthanasia is currently illegal in all 50 states in the United States. It is important to know the difference between different types of euthanasia, especially based on the difference between different countries' policies. Some may use that as a loophole to avoid legal issues. And now I want to talk a little bit about the history of the topic and how did the issue euthanasia arose from history. In the writing When Death is Sought, Chapter 5, published on the website of the Department of Health of New York State, it gives out a historical perspective of why the debate exists. The debate on whether euthanasia could be traced back to the very beginning of human civilizations. The writing mentioned on how the debate have rested on a broader principles about duties to self and to society, as well as fundamental question of the value of human life. So like throughout thousands of years of human history, many great philosophers and religious thinkers have addressed the ethics of suicide. The writing in chapter 5 talked about how in some Asian cultures like the Vikings, they usually view violent death in battle as an honor, but on the other hand, suicide as an alternative, as the second best. Likewise, the word euthanasia in Greek simply means good death, instead of helping others to end their life with goodwill. This is probably one of the reasons why ancient Greece euthanasia was not practiced. Just like the debate we're having in the society at the moment, ancient Greek philosophers were arguing on the matter as well. Plato believed that there are exceptional circumstances where suicide is acceptable. If one had an immoral and incorruptible character or had committed a disgraceful act, then it is suicide is acceptable at the time. That thinking is very close to what Bushido spirit stands for in Japan, not for another 1,000 years on another end of the planet. Opposite to that, Aristotle believed that suicide was unjust under all circumstances. He also thought that the practice was a violation of the responsibilities of citizenship. Other than that, since ancient times, Jewish and Christian thinkers have opposed suicide as inconsistent with the laws of nature, especially in terms of the relationship between human versus God or human versus nature, and their responsibilities to both of the roles. And it is not until the 16th century where some philosophers finally begin to challenge the generally accepted religious condemnation of suicide. Michael de Montigny argued that suicide was not a question of Christian life, but it is a matter of personal choice. And later on in the early 17th century, John Donne claims that while suicide is morally wrong in most cases, but it can still be acceptable if it is out of the intention of glorifying the God. And it is not until the 18th century where David Hume finally made the first defense on moral and ethical sides of suicide by suggesting if the act of suicide can benefit the group and the individuals, then it should be morally more acceptable. And at this point of the time, same as the ones before him, he did not think that all suicides should be justified. After centuries of philosophers and thinkers debating with one another, the first attempt of somewhere close to euthanasia took place around 1800. In the article 2, Pioneers of Euthanasia around 1800, the writer Michael Stolberg cites from Apology. It is the autobiography of a French surgeon named Amour Palais, who was trying to save 3 deeply wounded soldiers. An uninjured soldier asked the surgeon if they would live. After Palais indicated that there was none, the uninjured soldier calmly proceeded to cut their throats with a knife to end their lives. I know it's a heartbreaking story, but the story was from an autobiography. We don't know if it is based on real facts or not, but it is important to know that active euthanasia already exists at the time and was not out of the imagination in the early modern period. It was not too long after that when the first attempt to legalize euthanasia took place in the United States, when Henry Hunt introduced legalization into the General Assembly of Ohio in 1906. Coming back to modern times, there are still believers trying to legalize euthanasia on the legislative level. The website of the United States National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, includes a news story back in 2009. In that year's November, one of the parliament member named Francine Arnault in Canada introduced Bill C-384, in which she believes that it is time for the parliament to find a way to decriminalize medical assistance in dying, because she believed that it is important to the ones who are suffering, and there is no other way to relieve them except with the ultimate method of euthanasia. However, everything has two sides, and especially with the case like euthanasia, it is very controversial. On the other hand, there are many others who are against euthanasia. The arguments are mostly based on the moral and ethical perspectives mentioned above. Some of the arguments firmly believe that the public's opinions on physicians and doctors should only be healers, instead of focusing on what the patients want to do with their lives. Especially when healing is no longer possible. If death is a certain fact, counting by the minutes or patients find their suffering unbearable, then the physician's role should switch from healers to relieving suffering in agreeing with patients' wishes on ending their lives. But still, like, all of the medical staff should have not complied with a request to help or assist the patient to die. This usually appeared in between the ethical issues of medical staff, especially when talking about the minor debate on the violation of the Hippocratic Oath, in which it clearly states that I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody if asked for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. It is still a common sense to many people today that indeed the patients nearing the end of life could express fear of losing control or being deprived of dignity, compassionate, and supportive counseling is called for. Assistance in committing suicide is not an option that all should be thinking about. It is still a debate on very two far sides, which led to many different opinions on the matter. The debate of assisted suicide and euthanasia in medical ethics literature separates into actually three different sides in most public opinions. Some assert that any kind of assisted suicide or euthanasia is morally and ethically wrong, and such practice should be prevented from happening, regardless of the circumstances of particular cases. On the other hand, there are many thoughts on assisted suicide or euthanasia that are ethically legitimate and should be considered in some specific and rare circumstances. And the last group of thoughts insists that both of the practices should be recognized as legal and morally acceptable because these are options made by the dying or severely ill patients, and it is their right to pick and to decide what they're going to do with their lives. Well, in conclusion, I think there's no doubt that the practice of euthanasia or assisted suicide contains tons of arguments and debates. Many doctors and other healthcare professionals are unwilling to compromise their professional roles, especially under the light of Hippocratic Oath. But I mean, most are moral, and most of these arguments are based on moral, ethical, and religious arguments. But like as I mentioned previously, many faiths see euthanasia as a form of murder or a violation of God's and nature, and the practice is unacceptable. But to the ones who believe in that, they often view euthanasia as a way to weaken society's respect for this sanctity of life. On the other hand, personally, I think on the matter that society has to take some guilt as well, especially to some of the patients who may feel that there is too much burden on themselves, whether if they're in area of financially, emotionally, physically, and even mentally. Not only to them, but also to their family as well. So if it comes to me, I think euthanasia should only be voluntary, and that's the number one primary point that people should consider. Euthanasia is only voluntarily if the patient is mentally competent, with a clear understanding of every available options and consequences explained thoroughly to them. And also, most importantly, patient with the ability to express that understanding to terminate their own life to the outside. So in short, they'll have to clearly understand what they want, and they need to express that thinking and thoughts to the outside world clearly. But of course, it is hard, and the word um, mentally competent does not have like a strict chart to measure it. So it is kind of hard and not very straightforward to determine or define competence, which is, I think, is the biggest reason why this debate will continue to exist with the human society and the ethical issue along the way. And this is my final presentation on euthanasia. And thank you for watching.